started a series a couple weeks ago. I haven't gotten to teach in it yet, but I hope you caught it. If you missed, I know like Stacy says, crazy time of year. It seems like everyone's traveling, but go online if you've missed any of these. Larry Brown did the first one. It was excellent. Pastor Chris, our youth pastor, spoke last week. I got to sit here and listen to it live like you're doing now, and it was awesome. It was one of the best messages I've ever heard, and I truly mean that. So please go online and listen to that if you missed it. But today's my first chance to jump into the series, Amazing Stories, where we're just looking at this idea that the Bible is full of amazing stories. I mean, and not just that they're amazing for like some time in the past, they're stories that God wants to use for us today, to change our story now. God doesn't waste anything. So every great thing he did, every cool story, every miraculous event that took place, Old Testament, New Testament, whatever the case may be, God says, I want to use this story to change your story. Right where you're at, 2015. Don't look at these things as just ancient kind of, oh, wow, cool. That happened some long time ago, and that's when God was maybe different. He spoke more, or he did great. No. God says these stories can change you today. So learn them, read them, let them sink in. I mean, literally from Genesis to Revelation, you guys, those are the bookends of the Bible. Almost every other page, there's an amazing story. And you and I have the opportunity to just open that thing up and read them for ourselves and let God use them to absolutely change us. And that's why we're doing this series. We're not going to cover every amazing story. That would be impossible. It would take the rest of our lives to do that, every story from the Bible. We're going to just pick a few and say, let's let God speak to us through these stories. Let's let these stories change our story today. And we started in the Old Testament. Larry took us in the Old Testament. Last week, Pastor Chris jumped in the New Testament and told an amazing story that Jesus was a part of as usual. This week, we're going to go back to the Old Testament because a lot of the amazing stories that you read in the Bible center around and again, they're throughout the Bible, but a lot of them are kind of packed into this one part of human history where the nation of Israel, God's chosen people, were literally becoming a nation. I mean, there was a start to all of this, right? Just like everything has a beginning. Well, the Israelites, the Jewish people, they had a beginning. And they started off as a family that became a clan, that became a little community, and eventually God said, you're going to become a nation. And part of their story, and again, there's so many amazing stories that make up this bigger story, but part of their story was them becoming a nation. And a huge part of that story was them going into what the Bible refers to, and I'm sure you've heard the phrase before, the promised land. This part of the world, this big piece of dirt, if you will, that God said, this is where I want you to live. This is where I want the nation of Israel to flourish. This is where I want the lighthouse, so to speak, to spring up out of the earth and shine light to the rest of the world. It's the promised land. But if you know the story at all, if you know the history, it's okay if you don't, you know there was some opposition to that. That the Israelites couldn't just, when they were finally ready and they were big enough, they just didn't walk in and say, okay, we're here, make some houses, pitch some tents, start the farm, let's go. No, the promised land was full of other people. And this gets tricky, and I know a lot of people struggle with this part of the Bible, and I get that, I'm there with you. But for God's story to play out the way it was supposed to, and for the Israelites to come into their own and become the nation they were supposed to be, they needed to go in and conquer these people that were kind of in their seat, right? Remember back in school when you showed up to class and you had your seat and someone else was in your seat? You're like, hey, that's my seat, You're like, well, sorry, I'm here now. That's kind of how it was for the Israelites. But back in class, if you were smart, you just been like, oh, no big deal, let it roll off our backs. The Israelites couldn't do that. This was part of God's story. And if you study the Old Testament, you understand how the pieces work, you start to realize, you know what? God did need the Israelites to come in and take this land back. Conquer these peoples, push them out, whatever it is. Again, on the surface, it sounds a little rough, but if you struggle with that at all, and that's a whole nother message, we're not going to get there this morning, email me, call me, we'll go have coffee and we'll talk about it. Because I don't want that kind of thing to be a hindrance to your faith. Well, why are these stories in the Old Testament? Why did God tell the Israelites to do this and that? There are reasons. God is never arbitrary. And he's totally consistent from beginning to end. But anyway, so that's the context. And the Israelites are going to go into this promised land, and there was one key city, one spot that was absolutely critical for them to take in order to enter the promised land. It was a city called Jericho. If you grew up going to Sunday school, you probably know a song about Jericho. You've probably done some flannel graphs about Jericho at some point in your history. A lot of people know this story. And just to refresh you again, a lot of you know it, but they were going to go in, and the people of Jericho, you got to understand, they were nervous. They were scared because they had heard something miraculous was happening with these Israelites. I'm not sure that they knew, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, I'm not sure they knew it was really God who was behind it, like the one true God of the whole universe. I'm not convinced they knew that or believed that, but they knew something was happening with these Israelites. They had heard that somehow the Red Sea had literally split in two, and the Israelites walked across it on dry land while the Egyptian army, which was way, way bigger, chased them and eventually got swallowed up in the sea, and they escaped. That story had been going around. People were hearing about it. They had heard how the Israelites went into a couple areas already in the Promised Land and defeated kings and armies that were like way bigger than them, way more powerful, and they were winning. And now all of a sudden, this key fortified city of Jericho says, something's going on here. These guys are scary, and we could be next. And so the king says, everyone in the city, and they lock all the doors. No one's allowed to leave. In fact, just so you understand, literally the city was surrounded by like a gigantic wall. And that's weird for us to think of today. And it wouldn't be like, man, how'd they do that around Seattle or LA? Well, these were much smaller cities, all right? Think downtown Snoqualmie or maybe downtown Fall City or something like that. But nonetheless, they would build this huge wall around it. And Jericho, the king of Jericho said, everyone in, I don't know what's going on, but these people freak me out. There's something happening here. So bolt the doors, close the windows, no one leaves, no one comes in. That's the deal. And God says to Joshua, the leader of the Israelites at the time, you're going to come in and take this city. This is the next conquest for Israel. And he gives them the plan. Now, you got to kind of imagine for a moment, Joshua, he's the new young leader. He's the apprentice to Moses. Moses has passed away at this point. God's saying, Joshua, you're going to lead these people. You're going to take this city. And here's how you're going to do it. And I can only imagine Joshua just kind of, okay, I'm ready. I don't know how he spoke to Joshua. I don't know if it was a big booming voice or if it was just kind of a whisper in his heart or if he sent down like a playbook and it floated down from heaven, it landed we don't know. I don't think the last option would have happened, but somehow he spoke to him and he said, this is what you're going to do. You're going to take all the army guys, all the soldiers, and you're going to march around the city of Jericho. And you're also going to take 7 priests with you. And they're going to carry the Ark of the Covenant, which is just basically was a big box with sticks on it, but it held the tablets that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai. And it was the physical representation of God's presence with Israel. So he said, the priests are going to grab the ark. They're going to grab their trumpets. You're going to send all the soldiers, and they're going to march around the city of Jericho once a day for 6 days in a row. That's the battle plan. Okay, sounds a little weird, but I'm sure, Joshua, he's faithful. He's the leader of Israel. He's taking notes. Let's do it. Then on the 7th day, Joshua, on the 7th day, you're not going to march around one time. You're going to march around 7 times. And at the end of the march, all the priests are going to blow their trumpets, and everyone's just going to give a big shout, like, yeah, just something. I don't know. They just said they gave a big shout, the Howard Dean shouter or something kind of shout, something. And the walls will fall down, and you'll go in and take the city. That was God's plan. Now, again, I can only imagine Joshua's thinking, okay, God, I trust you. You've taken us this far, but we know they're afraid of us. We know they're freaked out. Let's just get a battering ram and just knock down the door. Let's dig a hole underneath. Let's get the big ladders from like the Lord of the Rings movies and climb up over the top and get in there. They're already freaking out. We can take these guys. We don't have to do something, like weird. Something only God miraculous. No. This is how you're going to do it. And sure enough, the book of Joshua tells us that's exactly what happened. Joshua said, okay, we'll do it. We'll do it your way. They go in. They march around 6 times. They march around 7 times on the 7th day. They blow the trumpets. They give a big shout, and the walls come crumbling down. It's amazing, isn't it? Except, like every good, amazing story, there's a story behind the story. If you only look at the story of Jericho and look, wow, that's okay, I guess that's what happened, but you would miss so much of what God is really trying to teach us through a story of the fall of Jericho. There's a story behind the story. Just before God had told Joshua, this is the battle plan, he sent 2 spies into the city. Some of you, again, you grew up in Sunday school, you've read the story yourself, you know the story. He sent 2 spies into the city to check it out. Here's the thing you guys have to understand about God, and I'm learning every day. Following God, following Jesus, being in step with him is always a marriage of trusting him when he tells you to do something that makes no sense, and still being wise, still being prepared, still planning ahead. We tend to think like, well, it's got to be one or the other. And I can't do the whole faith thing because it's just, I got to check my brain at the door and God will tell me to do crazy things and who knows if it's right or wrong or if he's really speaking. Almost every story you see, there's an aspect of, wow, God did something miraculous, and okay, the leaders, the people that God used were wise. They were smart. They were making plans. They were thinking ahead. Same thing with Joshua. Joshua was a great military leader. He knew how this stuff worked. And so right before all this happened and God spoke to him, he sent out 2 spies and said, we got to know about this city. We got to know how powerful they are. We got to know kind of how it's fortified and how we can get in and all those sorts of things. And so sure enough, these 2 spies were able to get into the city and do some reconnaissance work. And they come in and they figure out, and the Bible doesn't give us all the details, but they enter the house of a woman named Rahab. Some of you have heard of Rahab before. The Bible describes her as a prostitute. Now, do that with that what you may. What does that mean? How did she become that? Was she forced into that? Was that something she chose on her own? We just don't know. And obviously, for us as adults, we know just whatever that meant, that it wasn't good. And the implications of that are devastating for a person's life. But that's what the Bible says she was. Now, here's why I bring that up, and it's so important. I'm not a labels guy. I don't know if some of you know me pretty well. We may have had this conversation. I hate being labeled because once someone puts a label on you, they think they know you. They think they got you pegged. They think I stay away from political labels. I usually don't even like the term Christian because that means a million different things to a million different people out there. When I talk about my faith, when I have that conversation, I love Jesus. I try to follow the teachings of the Bible. I believe in being saved by God's grace from whatever it is, trying to explain it, put flesh to it. Because when we put labels on things, people think they know you. People think they got you figured out. So when the Bible uses some kind of label for a person, it's communicating, it's helping us understand that was their identity. That's how they saw themselves. That's how other people saw them. It's giving us a clue into really who they were. And again, we don't know how that worked out for Rahab. We don't know why she was a prostitute. Maybe she just had a really hard life and she thought that was the only way to go. Again, maybe, and this wasn't uncommon in those days. Unfortunately, it's still not uncommon in certain parts of our world. Maybe she was just forced to do it. Maybe she was, someone, put a knife to her throat and said, you're going to do this and make me some money. We don't know. But that was her identity. And think about that. And again, I don't know, there's some kids in the room. We'll try to keep it PG here, but just think about what that entails. Think about if you were in that situation, how you would see yourself. Think about the self-worth you would have. Think about how other people would see you. And yet the one person that was safe, the one person that took these 2 Israelite spies in was Rahab, the prostitute. And she stows them away. She hides them away. The city's in fear. The city's like, no, let's buckle down, and we got to stand firm against these guys, and we don't want them to wipe us out too. And yet this one woman probably struggled with her own self-worth. Definitely the people around her said, worthless, no value whatsoever. Human trash. Says, I'm going to help you out. I see something else going on here. In fact, I want to pick up in this part of the story. It's in Joshua chapter 2. And it says, before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof. And again, this is her house, the Bible tells us. She invited these 2 in. And at this point, the little backstory here is that some soldiers had noticed this, and they thought, well, who are those guys? They don't look right. They don't look like part of us. So they went and told the king, and the king's like, those are Jewish spies. Let's go find them. You got to get them. So they go to Rahab, and they say, hey, we saw these men come into your house. And she's like, well, yeah, I know, but I was afraid to, and so I sent them on their way, and I think they're out of the city by now. Don't worry about it. Everything should be fine. Okay. But again, she was actually hiding them. She says, before the spies lay down for the night, and this was after all that happened, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. Listen to what she says. Not because of God, because of you. They weren't sure what was going on. They just knew there was something special, something weird, something powerful. But man, the Israelites are like, they're taking over. And they walked through the Red Sea, and they've already conquered these other kings. The people are afraid because of you. But look what she says. Look what she points out. Stay on that slide, Matt, just for a second. I know that the Lord has given you this land. I know what's going on. How does she know? I don't know. But she's figured it out. Rahab, she gets the one true God is behind these people. The one God that really can move heaven and earth. We think there's all these other little gods. These people over here worship their little gods, but nothing ever happens. The one God that really can do something because he is real. I know that he has given you this land. And a great fear has fallen on us that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. Next slide. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. The stories are going, we know this stuff. But I know really what's going on. I've figured it out. God's spoken to me something. And then this line. You can go to the next one there, Matt. When we heard of it, when we heard of all this, our hearts melted in fear. And everyone's courage failed because of you. Because. For the Lord, your God, is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Because the Lord, your God, is the God in heaven above and the earth below. This isn't a Jewish woman. This isn't part of the nation of Israel. She's not someone who's in the know. How does she know this? How did she come to this conclusion? Why would she think this? Everyone else in Jericho was just kind of hunkering down, standing firm. We don't know what's going on, but we are going to stand our ground and fight back against these guys, and just hopefully they won't take us like they're doing everyone else. And then one woman, this prostitute, says, no, I know what's really going on here. The God of heaven above and the earth below is behind this. And therefore, I'm going to help. Here's essentially what she's saying. I'm switching sides. I'm not going to stand in the way of what God is doing. I'm going to make sure I am on the right side of the field. I'm going to be on the winning team here. Because your God, the Lord, the God of heaven above and earth below, is the one who is behind this. So here's the exchange that they have after that. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and my mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. And the Israelite spies reply this way, our lives for your lives. The men assured her, if you don't tell what we are doing, if you really are on our side with this, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. You're a prostitute. You're worthless. Are you kidding me? Thanks for hiding us, but you deserve to get wiped out with everyone else. I'm not saving you. You're not worthy. You're not a Jewish person. This is God's special chosen people thing. No. If you really, Rahab, if you really get this, if you really understand what's going on, if you really believe that the Lord is the God of heaven above and earth below, you're going to help us with this thing. You're not going to stand in his way, but you're going to get on board the winning team. We'll save you. Heck, consider yourself part of us. You're part of God's family. You're in this thing too. And guys, what's so amazing about this story, it is mind-blowing. God, if you believe that, and I certainly do, and the Bible testifies to this, that God took out the city of Jericho the way that he did. Marching around it, blowing trumpets, give a big shout, and the walls come I mean, that's amazing. But what's more amazing is the person he used, the linchpin, the catalyst, to open the door for that. Someone who everyone else said worthless. Someone who probably struggled with her own worth because of the choices she had made and the things that had been done to her and what the world said about her. And her identity was probably so mixed up, and yet somehow in the midst of all that, she believed, she knew that God is great, that God is real, that he's the one to be on side with. And therefore God said, I can use you to do something great. I can use you to be a part of my amazing story. And that's really the big idea this morning, is that being part of God's amazing stories, and there's so many in the Bible, but for us here today, some 2,000 years later, or many thousands of years later in the story of Joshua and Jericho and Rahab, That being part of God's amazing stories is dependent not on how worthy you think you are, but on how great you know God is. I don't want you to miss that. God has amazing stories that he has done and that he is still playing out in our world today for all of us. And being part of those stories has nothing to do with how worthy you think you are. It has nothing to do with how worthy the rest of the world thinks you are. It only has to do with how great you know God is. That's what Rahab learned. Rahab said, I'm not standing in the way of the God of the universe. I'm jumping on board. Everyone else is scared and freaked out, but they're standing their ground. They said, no, this is our land. Rahab said, I know what's going on here. And yeah, I'm messed up, and yeah, people think I'm messed up, and yeah, this whole life thing has not turned out the way I had hoped, and I have been hurt and abused and messed up, and I'm not even sure what I think about myself. But I know how great God is. I know that this wasn't a fluky thing, and this wasn't some magic trick, and the Israelites defeating these other kings over here wasn't just a fluke lucky day. I know that the God of the universe, the one true God, is behind all this. And I'm getting on board. I believe in how great he is. See, Rahab had a moment of decision. Just like all of us have a moment of decision. Wherever you're at in life, whatever you come up against, we have to decide, are we going to get on board with what God is doing? Or are we going to just be in his way? And there's really no neutrality there. It's really one or the other. And God, as people who come to church and seek out Christ and try to figure out what this life of faith is all about, he says, trust me. I'm the God of the heaven above and the earth below. Don't stand in my way. Get on board my team. See, if Rahab were to not hide the spies, if Rahab were not to be a part of the amazing story that God was about to unfold, it wouldn't be because of her past. It wouldn't be because of her identity issues and the things she struggled with. It would have been because of a lack of faith. It would have been because she simply just said, you know what? I'm not sure this is really God. But now she decided, God is great. God is awesome. And that's who I want to identify myself with. That's who I want to be. That's the side I want to be on as I live my life. And it would absolutely change her forever. You're going to see Rahab's name show up in a few other parts of the Bible. This prostitute, this person that I can guarantee you was seen as absolutely worthless by her culture, her society, the surrounding people. And yet she becomes one of the heroes of the Bible. One of my favorite movies, I think it came out maybe when I was in elementary school, middle school, and I'm a sports guy, so it just makes sense. But there's an old movie called The Pistol, and it's the story of Pistol Pete Maravich. And if you're a basketball fan, or if you know sports history at all, you might be familiar with this guy. But Pistol Pete was one of the greatest college basketball players of all time. And in the movie, it's supposed to be a true story based on his 8th grade year. And back where he grew up, in that time, 8th grade was in high school. And he was tiny, he was skinny, he was just this little guy, but he could do things with a basketball that literally no one had ever seen. I mean, he was the start of something great. He was the start of something new. And when people saw it, it just blew their minds, but it was hard to accept because we don't like new stuff. We like things the way they have been. We don't like change, and we just want to keep going. And so Pistol Pete comes on the scene. He starts doing all this crazy stuff, and all the other kids in the high school that were all like juniors and seniors on the varsity team, and Pistol Pete could, run circles around all of them, and he made the varsity team, but they looked at him and said, this kid's a punk, and he's just trying to mess with us, and whatever. And there's a scene in the movie where the captain of the team, his name is Buddy, he was the leading scorer, he was the point guard, he was the all-star, all that kind of stuff, and he's totally been shown up by little Pistol Pete, and Pistol Pete's dad, who was a college basketball coach, corners Buddy at one point, not in a weird way, but just says, I want to talk to you. He says, here's what you need to understand. You're a great basketball player. You've got all kinds of skills and things to offer this game. But you are missing the boat. What Pete is doing is where basketball is going. And you can either stand in the way of that, or you can get on board. You could be a part of this thing. You can jump in and be part of the future. Be a part of this amazing story that's unfolding for the sport of basketball. And we don't really know from the movie necessarily what he ultimately does with that, but the message was clear. Rahab had that kind of decision to make. You and I have that kind of decision to make every day of our lives. Are we going to trust God? Are we going to do the things that he says? Are we going to read his word and say, yeah, I'm going to go your direction? Or we say, nah, I'll do it my way. Nah, I don't agree with that part. Nah, that's a little antiquated. I'm not going to go there. Nah, whatever, on and on and on and on. And we stand in the way of what God is doing. And I'm not saying God's going to, blow us over with a bulldozer like what happened with the people of Jericho, but we'll miss out. We'll miss out on the amazing stories, the things that God wants to do through us. Look at this. It's found in Hebrews chapter 11. It's what Bible scholars refer to as the Faith Hall of Fame in the Bible. And if you read through, it's got all these names and all these people that just normal men and women like you and I who trusted God enough to do what he said, and they found themselves in the middle, or the catalyst for, or the unsung hero behind one of God's amazing stories. And if you get far enough, you read through that list in Hebrews chapter 11, you come to verse 30, and it says, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. A lot of us just say, wow, if that's true, that's amazing. That's the amazing story of that whole Joshua chapter 2 through 6 kind of thing. But then right there, almost like it's of equal amazement, it says this, by faith, the prostitute Rahab. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. In Matthew chapter 1, you read how Rahab somehow, and we don't know the history of this, ended up being in the family tree of Jesus himself. Through the right marriage to the right person after all this had happened. Rahab the prostitute. James even mentions her. Uses her as a model of faith and trust in God. Rahab the prostitute. She knew that the Lord her God, the Lord our God, is God in heaven above and on the earth below. And my question for you this morning is, do you know that too? I think a lot of you do. Some of you are still searching that out. Some of you are still trying to figure that out. Some of you are still asking the question. That's okay. Keep asking. You'll get the answer you need. But if you know that, if you go to bed at night and you say, yeah, you know what? I believe God is the God of the universe. I believe God really is who he says he is. I believe he's God of heaven above and earth below. That's all you need. That's all you need to be a part of his amazing story. And you've got a chance today. You've got a chance tomorrow. There's going to be a decision to make. There's going to be a relationship that's going to cross your path. There's going to be something, and God's going to say, I need you to stand up for me, or I need you to make the right decision here. I need you to make the tough call. I need you to invest in this person. And you're not going to see right at the moment how this fits into the amazing story I'm unfolding for your life and the life of I-90 Community Church, or the life of Issaquah Community, or the life of the community of Snoqualmie, or wherever the case. You don't see it right now, but if you trust me enough to do what I say, that's the definition of faith, by the way. It's the best biblical definition of faith you can get. It's not believing hard enough or just, ascribing to certain things. No, trusting God enough to do what he says. That is faith. He says, if you would trust me and do what I say, you'll be part of my amazing stories. God wants to use every one of us, and you may not think you're worthy. You may not think you've got what it takes. You may think you've got too much baggage. You may think you're just not at the right time in life. You may think you're too busy. My wife got a text yesterday that we didn't know it was coming. I certainly wasn't thinking about this earlier in the week when I was thinking about this message, but she gets a text, and it's a video of a preschool girl she taught 2 years ago, reciting Psalm 23. Rachel had her, she taught preschool at a Christian preschool, and she had her class, every student, memorize Psalm 23 from start to finish. It took them a long time. They're 3 and 4-year-olds, right? But they did it. Well, this little girl's grandpa just this past week died, totally suddenly, not expected whatsoever. Had some kind of stroke, something happened, and he passed away. Devastated the family, very, very sad. And this memorial service that they had, I think at a Catholic church somewhere, just jam-packed, hundreds of people. This guy was loved and very well known in his community. And this little girl gets up at a point in the service, and she recites Psalm 23 from memory, start to finish, perfectly. And the text that my wife got was a video of it that the mom made. Tears running down her face, everyone's crying, and the whole church just explodes in applause at the end. In the midst of their mourning, in the midst of their grief, in the midst of just the frustration of why him and he was healthy and that shouldn't have happened and all this kind of stuff, this little girl who believed God was the God of heaven above and earth below recites the 23rd Psalm. And I believe probably radically changed the lives of hundreds of people sitting there listening to it. Rachel would have never guessed that would happen. Rachel would have and that's not what she was thinking when she had these kids doing. She just knew God was saying, teach these kids my word. Teach these kids about who I am. Teach these kids about how much I love them and that I am their good shepherd and I always will be there for them, even when they walk through the valley of the shadow of death. If you know that the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below, God has an amazing story He wants you to be a part of. Simple as that. We just have to say, yes.